Scanning for audio.
You're listening to the Christmas Day edition of the Tin Dog Podcast. Merry Christmas to you all. Before I review tonight's episode of Doctor Who, I give you a short story written by me. I hope you enjoy it. As a special Christmas gift, I'd like to read one of my short stories. This was my original entry into the Big Finish Short Trips competition, which of course, sadly, didn't win. Otherwise you'd be able to hear someone with a lot more talent reading this out. But I hope you enjoy a little Christmas present. Very Little Green Men by M.M. Gilroy Sinclair. The diminutive general had been alone for most of the day. The primary and secondary suns were providing one of the most perfect summer afternoons in living memory. Even the singing serpents had a melancholy tone to their already haunting song. Beneath the dappled shade of the tree, the general lay undisturbed. He had given over the last few moments to the demanding task of deciding upon which drink would be best suited to help pass the time. The only other figure in the garden was a sleek Mark 17 man-droid, motionless but constantly aware, his sole task to fulfill the general's slightest whims. Light danced through the trees and speckled across his gold-covered skull. The electric butler had been checking on the general's well-being at seemingly random, yet mathematically perfect, intervals. Each time the mechanical man had stirred into a semblance of life, silently approached the gently napping general, and let out a synthesized coughing sound that almost perfectly replicated the polite tones of a long-dead actor from Earth, an actor renowned for playing abrupt yet loyal butlers in popular period dramas. Many years previously, a specialist in android design had spent a large portion of his time whiling away his afternoons whilst watching strange broadcasts from the long-dead world known as Earth. One grey afternoon he had decided that, from that day onwards, all of his machines would have characteristics derived from obscure characters, from obscure broadcasts, from this obscure world. It was, after all, the sort of thing that android programmers did, especially after an afternoon drinking with a stranger who had a surprisingly in-depth knowledge of Earth culture. No one who ever bought a Mark 17 would ever know why they were called Hudson, and that very thought kept the programmer happy when the taxman came calling. The general was totally unaware of the amount of research work and drinking that programmer second class Alkan Bandrem freelance had put into the Mark 17. He was, however, more than aware of how irritating the constant interruptions from the synthetic butler had become to this perfectly blue and clear day. A day of nothing in particular. For the last time, the general was irritatingly aware of the Mark 17's approach. Long before the synthesized coughing had begun, "What is it, Hudson?" he grunted, without removing his large-brimmed hat from his privileged position over his face. "There's someone to see you, sir," Hudson replied, using number 3 matter-of-fact voice, the one supposed to convey the most resignation. "No, there isn't. The grounds are secured, and the primary's left you in charge, with access to some pretty formidable weaponry." He thought for a moment, and went on. "I'm also pretty sure the lizards would see off any intruders. So why don't you get me a nice grano juice and be quiet? There really is someone to see you, sir." This time a hidden set of algorithms changed the mandroid's tone in a way the general had never heard before. Lazily he lifted his wide-brimmed hat from its previous position. The sudden inrush of light made his iris contract and managed to give the garden an even more unworldly feel. "I'm sorry to say, but your robot's quite correct. There is someone to see you. In fact, that someone's me." The General's eyes squinted on the interloper. In between his favourite tree and the Mark 17 was an oddly dressed small man. His face seemed unused to smiling, but had decided to add an afternoon off. Over his shoulder was an umbrella which seemed to be giving a distinct lack of shade. The figure gently dabbed his forehead with a yellowing handkerchief. "I have 2 questions," the General said sharply. "Who are you, and why aren't you dead?" "This is the doctor," said the Mark 17 helpfully. "A doctor, but I'm not ill." "No?" said the small man. "Are you sure?" The interloper's voice bore a strange similarity to the Hudson unit. The General had been left alone, and had thought that he would not be disturbed for some time. He disliked interruption at the best of times, but to interrupt an afternoon's napping was unforgivable. The doctor surveyed the garden and stated simply, "I'd like to play a game." "A game? Do you know who I am?" said the General. The doctor's eyes narrowed. "Oh yes, I know exactly who you are." The emphasis on the word exactly left the General feeling slightly uneasy. The doctor continued, "You were a 12-year-old boy whose parents are politicians of note. You were known as the General amongst your wargaming friends. I also know how important you are to the future of this charming little world." The silence hung heavy across the grounds. The mandroid's embarrassment subroutines cut in after a moment. "Would you like me to set up the gaming area?" Ignoring the robot, the child said, "You didn't answer my second question." The doctor pondered for a moment. "Why aren't I dead? Well, I could say a combination of wily charm, good fortune and intelligence, but that's not what you mean, is it? You want to know why this robot hasn't used its formidable arsenal to obliterate me. Why don't you ask him?" The robot needed no encouragement. Trusting and obeying the doctor is part of every Hudson unit's core programming since the Mark I over 100 years ago. The doctor smiled once more. "Do you see the lengths I'm willing to go to play a game with you? Just one game." The doctor nodded sagely. "That sandpit over there should do nicely." "But I've got a gaming room. It's ready. All the classics are there." "Ah, this battle isn't a classic." He sounded heavy-hearted and changed the topic. "Let's see if I've got anything we can use for this game, shall we?" He motioned for the boy to follow him as the doctor searched his jacket pockets and removed an assortment of items that mostly came under the heading of "could be useful one day." The sandpit had seen better days. The General had seen such pastimes as beneath him for some time, as the abandoned shovel and buckets would testify. This simply made the doctor smile. Perfect. He flung himself to his knees and began sculpting the sandpit into 3 very distinct areas. A lowland with 2 separate hills. On each of the hills he played one of the long-forgotten buckets. On top of the buckets he played a marble taken from the interior's capacious pockets, 1 red and 1 blue. And as for soldiers, we can use these. The doctor held 4 tiny green army men from a Christmas cracker. 4? It's hardly a war game, more of a skirmish. "This," said the doctor, "is the most important moment of the war. The destruction of the planetary shield generator, or at least one whose simultaneous failure will cause a cascade in the others." "What? Your men need to capture one of the marbles," rephrased the doctor. "Which one?" "That's for you to decide. Oh, I almost forgot. You'll need an enemy." The doctor looked down at the salt and pepper pots in his hands and replaced them back into his pocket with a dejected look on his face. "Your enemy is invisible." Incredulity spread over the General's face. "What? That's hardly fair. How will I know you aren't cheating?" "Is this the sort of face that would cheat?" replied the doctor with a grin. "Your enemies are invisible, and I know exactly where they are based and their tactics. Let's begin." The noise outside the bunker was dulled by the enforced walls that kept the General safe. Many years had passed since that afternoon in the garden, and the world was not the place it once was. Like locusts they had fallen from the sky and devoured crops and turned their attention on the people. Slowly the fight back had taken shape. Random and unexpected heroes had risen and fallen, all to defeat this nameless invader from the stars. Losses were heavy, but tonight would be etched into the General's memory. He had lost 8 soldiers, leaving him with only 4 recruits. "Sir?" the communicator crackled. "The shield generator." An old, battered Mark 17 mandroid passed him the handset. "What about it?" "There are 2 of them, sir," came the terrified response. The General thought for a moment and looked down his holographic battlefield simulator. Constantly updating and pulsing with energy, the 2 towers appeared as information was updated directly from the field. A box-shaped object was next to one. "Can you give me a description?" A heavy burst of static, and then a reply. "They're exactly the same, sir. One has a red light on the top, the other a blue. Which do we attack? Memories danced inside the General before he replied with a smile. The blue. I repeat, the blue. It's largely unguarded except for a pop-up defence unit in front of the main door. Don't attack the red. A friend is going to take care of that one. Understood, came the simple reply. Somewhere deep in the programming of the Mark 17, a subroutine smiled. I hope you enjoyed that story. Suffice to say, Merry Christmas, thank you for listening to the Tin Dog Podcast, and be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.